speakers, Dr. Arkia and Dr. Pia Daniel, and our CME chair, Dr. Amit Chakravarti, and our office manager who's going to be helping us behind to run the CME very smoothly, and also to all our viewers who are able to log in, and hopefully more members will be logging in soon in next 5-10 minutes. But let me introduce myself. So I'm Dr. Anupama Gotimukula. I'm president of AAPI, and we are in the last month of our academic year. We end June end. This is our last CME activity now, and we are so fortunate that we were able to do these CME webinars every month, second Saturday of June. So we have done all 12 months pretty much, and excellent speakers from all academic programs we had. And I thank Dr. Amit and Dr. Sagar, who have brought excellent, outstanding speakers to our CME sessions. And also, we have a convention coming up in June from 23rd to 26th, which is an in-person conference. And we have about 25 speakers there, and plus 4 or 5 lifestyle medicine. So we have close to 30 speakers who are going to be giving us good CMEs in the convention. And without much delay, I'm going to introduce Amit Chakravarti, who's the CME chair this year. And he is going to introduce our speakers, and then we will get started with the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anupama. And it's been a great year. As you know, this is the last CME of her year, my CME chair year. We started in August last year, and we have done consistently except for January. And we try to do it on second Saturday of each month. And we have, like I had promised before, we have tried to do this year's CME kind of out of the box, unique topics which would interest every member. In other words, it is not specialty specific, and I think we have done a reasonably good job. I really thank Sagar for bringing unique speakers and amazing speakers and coming up with amazing topics. And he has been really my partner in crime, so to speak. And so today is the topping, is the icing on the cake, if I may use that word, the best one of the topics, I think, which we have had. All of them are great, but this one is a very timely topic. Believe it or not, when we thought about this topic 1 month ago, there were no shootings. Since that time, we have had about 7 or 8 shootings, and it could not have been a better time to discuss this, which will let us know our preparedness, how to handle it, how to handle an active shooter sequence. All of us may be faced with it. Tomorrow when we are at the ER seeing a patient, all of us are exposed, can be exposed to this. So it couldn't be a better topic. And thank you very much for the speakers. And let me, without further ado, introduce Pia Daniel. Dr. Daniel is an assistant professor. She's an MPH, also assistant professor of emergency medicine in SUNY downstate, and also the medical director of emergency preparedness and chair of workplace violence committee. So we could not have a more greater speaker on this topic than Pia. She completed her emergency medicine residency and emergency preparedness fellowship at SUNY downstate in Brooklyn, New York. And she completed her Master of Public Health at Columbia University with a focus across 3 areas of expertise: organizational leadership and management, health policy, and public health and health system. She developed a niche in the disaster preparedness and response, combining her MD and MPH degrees to promote the integration of clinical response and public health policy in disaster readiness. Dr. Daniel serves in the New York City Healthcare Coalition Leadership Council Governance Board, works with New York City Department of Health to support New York's healthcare system preparedness and response to these disasters. Where could we have, we know how we can be faced with these kind of disasters. Dr. Daniel served as chair of board of directors of the American College of Academic International Medicine, working to promote public health programs globally. She has helped develop multiple disaster drills, including adult mass casualty incidents, pediatric hospital evacuations for hospital, and disaster coalitions in New York City area. She has worked with New York City Department of Health on developing and testing policies related to disaster response. She has led a disaster response team to help the relief efforts for the Puerto Rico 2017 hurricanes. She has organized disaster preparedness seminars for medical conferences in India, Sri Lanka, Qatar, and also in the United States. She has published on disaster response and training. She has presented her research at multiple international conferences, including IPRED in Israel, Indus EM in India, WADM in South Africa. She completed her medical school at Rutgers in New Jersey and undergraduate at NYU, New York. So without further ado, that was a mouthful, but I'm sure all of us know how important and what an amazing speaker we have for this topic. So over to you, Pia.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm just going to open up my slides. All right, so again, thank you so much for the introduction. And I also have so I did my fellowship in disaster medicine with Dr. Aquila, who is my co-speaker for this. So I just always like to give her credit. She taught me everything I know. And so I'm gonna start by speaking about workplace violence and de-escalation strategies. And I'm always going to kind of give everything sort of a healthcare facility spin, just to really emphasize sort of the differences between applying these strategies in a healthcare setting. And then whenever I talk about workplace violence and active shooter, I always like to include a little bit about stop the bleed, because that's so important. And just understanding that a healthcare facility is going to have a lot of non-clinical staff members working there, and just how important it is that everybody understands those basics. Then I'm going to talk about general active shooter response strategies, and then focus on the healthcare facility specific issues, the ethical concerns, and what does that mean when we apply it to areas where we have clinical care and non-clinical care. And then Dr. Aquila is going to go into more details on sort of the basics of treating gunshot victims, talking about the bullets, the guns, and how we manage those victims, and then also documentation. So to start with, I just want to focus a little bit on workplace violence and how we can sort of train staff and prepare them to help manage these situations and hopefully even de-escalate and prevent them. This is data, it's a little bit dated from 1998, but at that time, more than 2 million workers each year were victims of workplace violence. And when you just look like in that decade alone in the 90s, you see a 400% growth. And unfortunately, that trend has been continuing. So this is really, really important and really applies to everybody. And in the last year, the Joint Commission has included increased requirements for workplace violence preparedness activities and response activities for healthcare facilities. And so my facility, one of the first things we did is, really established a well-rounded workplace violence committee where it's involved many departments. And what the Joint Commission, their goals in sort of increasing these requirements is they really want to help educate people on really the scope of workplace violence, really defining it. So it's not just about physical violence, but really it encompasses threatening, intimidating, harassing, bullying, sexual harassment. So really the scope is, I think, much larger than a lot of people realize. So I know the Joint Commission is really trying to emphasize and redefine this and make sure that people understand really the full scope of this, so that we're capturing and reporting it accurately. And that way we're able to get a better sense of actually how big this issue is in all workplace environments, but especially in healthcare facilities. I think it's important to just understand that when we talk about workplace violence, there's 4 different types. So we have sort of just violent criminals who will come onto a premise just to commit a crime and they're otherwise not affiliated with it. We also have customer clients. So in a healthcare facility, that looks like either patients or visitors and doing workplace violence against employees or staff of the healthcare facility. You also have coworker, right? So you have staff on staff workplace violence. And again, it's not just physical violence. It could be sort of anything in that scope that we just talked about. And then the last is personal. So there can be violence in the workplace by somebody who doesn't work there, but they have a personal relationship with an employee. And so what the new requirements for healthcare facilities are asking you to do is really think about activities that can help prepare and mitigate each of these different types of workplace violence, and think about how your facility is actually capturing when these incidents happen, and also then how you're responding to them and how you're kind of dealing with the aftermath of these issues. And again, it's just really, really important that everybody understands the scope of workplace violence. It's not just physical violence, it really includes a lot of different things. So when we're training staff at our facility, these are, I took a lot of the slides that I actually use in our training. We want to make sure that each staff member understands kind of the basics of how to de-escalate sort of an impending workplace violence situation. So when there is somebody who is beginning to act out and you are anticipating that this could escalate, a couple of just key really important things for staff to remember. So first is to be empathetic. Really try to understand and clarify what is it that this person is upset about, what is the real message, and let them know that you are hearing them and that you're sort of understanding what's going on with them. It's really important for staff safety to make sure that you're maintaining physical distance from the person. So, I usually say at least, 1.5 to 3 feet away from the person. And ideally, if you can put like furniture between you and the person. Again, this is to keep yourself safe, but also from a perspective of de-escalating, it's very intimidating to have somebody come up into your face, into your personal space. And so that will also kind of help de-escalate. And then you want to really ignore any kind of challenging questions that are designed to get a sort of an emotional reaction out of you. And you want to try to bring the conversation back, redirect it back to really the issue, what's the real issue the patient has. Again, sort of part of that being empathetic and understanding what their concern is. And then one thing that people don't realize is that it actually is really therapeutic to allow somebody to just do verbal venting. I think that you guys can all think about a time when you saw either a patient or a visitor start to get really upset, start to scream, and then think about different ways that you've seen staff members deal with it. Think about when somebody sort of reacts to that by yelling back, by being very aggressive back and getting emotional, versus somebody who responds to that by just being calm and letting that person vent, and then kind of going back in and trying to de-escalate it. And so really just letting somebody scream and vent, that on its own can help de-escalate situations and kind of just let them release all that energy and those emotions they're feeling. And then it's really important for our staff members to think about their own nonverbal and verbal cues. So think about how you're standing, think about your posture, think about the tone that you're using. Really the most important thing is to just keep that poker face, stay calm, be empathetic, let them vent, make sure you maintain that physical distance. And sometimes that's not enough, and workplace violence incidents can happen. So when de-escalation strategies aren't possible or don't work, then these are sort of the response that we teach staff. So first is to get yourself to a safe location. Think about yourself, your other coworkers, the other patients and visitors, and if possible, get everybody to a safe area where you can, ideally close the door with a lock. You want to just think about your space, right? And so I had said sort of maintaining that distance can help sort of de-escalate, but also, it's important to have physical space, to maybe have some furniture between you and the other person. Think about where your exits are. It's really important that staff try to not corner themselves and try to never have the exit being blocked by the person who's doing the workplace violence. And so even when you're just interacting with patients that have maybe been sort of flagged in your healthcare system as potentially violent or psychiatric or dementia patients, really always think about when you're encountering those people to never really have yourself cornered and to make sure that you always have access to your exit. This is our extension for hospital police. So just make sure that your staff knows how to reach security for your facility. You'd be surprised how many people don't know that when we're doing the training. So it's really important that all of your staff know how to do that. We encourage people to, scream for help as needed. And then if the workplace violence becomes an active shooter situation, I'm going to get into more details about that, but it's really important. We've changed to plain language for our overhead page. And so really think about how you're communicating when there is an active shooter event. And then I'm going to go into some more details about what run, hide, fight looks for you individually as a healthcare worker, and then also kind of what it looks like for your department or your unit. And then again, we really want facilities to be capturing these events. Administration needs to really understand when they're happening, what types of events are happening, the areas they're happening, and that requires sort of at the moment to file an incident report. And again, we talked earlier about sort of the scope of workplace violence. It's more than just when there's physical harm. It's a much bigger scope. And so it's really sort of incumbent on the staff to be notifying administration when these events are happening. So that's just a quick sort of summary of workplace violence, de-escalation strategies, and how to kind of respond and sort of the tools that we train our staff in dealing with workplace violence incidents. And so the next part is to talk about stop the bleed basics, which I think is really important. Again, anytime you're talking about workplace violence or active shooter, to at least bring this up. Obviously, clinicians, emergency medicine clinicians, surgery clinicians, they probably understand this, but think about all the non-clinical staff in your facility, think about all the non-clinical areas in your facility, and then even clinicians who don't normally work with sort of trauma type injuries, they may not necessarily know the basics of Stop the Bleed. And so Stop the Bleed is sort of a national kind of grassroots campaign, and it's designed to help decrease the number of deaths nationally from bleeding out, so from hemorrhaging, from penetrating wounds and injuries. And again, we think, oh, it's a hospital, it's filled with doctors, but again, a lot of the employees may not really understand these basics. And so to just always include this when you talk about active shooter with your facility. There's a lot of Stop the Bleed trainings, and I just sort of included a couple of slides just so that everybody on this talk understands the basics of it. So it's really about applying pressure. If that can stop the bleeding, if that doesn't, then packing a wound to try to stop the bleeding. And if that doesn't work, then applying a tourniquet. And when we think about the Stop the Bleed training, and when you talk to your staff about it, you have to also make sure that you have the tools for Stop the Bleed available in all the areas of your facility. So again, think about all the non-clinical areas. Are there tourniquets there? Are there wound kits and first aid kits? And if there aren't, then you want to think about where in my facility do we need to include these so that no matter where an event happens, anybody would have access to this potentially life-saving supplies. And this just goes into a little bit more detail about just specifically, again, you want to do everything you can to stop the bleeding. First, it's about exposing the wound, applying pressure, and then packing the wound if pressure doesn't help. And then when you're training staff on Stop the Bleed and applying tourniquets, don't assume that they know how to operate a tourniquet. Even our clinicians, we don't normally use the types of tourniquets that they teach for Stop the Bleed. And so it's just important that everybody actually understands how to use it. And during these trainings, I like to bring the actual tourniquets that we will be using and have people practice it. And just make sure they understand the basics of tourniquet application. So you want it to be 2 to 3 inches between the wound and the heart. This really only applies to extremity injuries, and you never want to apply a tourniquet to a joint. And then again, sort of just showing them exactly how to tighten the tourniquet and how to secure it is really important. And again, allowing people to practice this. And I can't stress enough for the non-clinical people, they really need a chance to learn how to do this and practice this. And then it's important to also always note the time that a tourniquet's been put on. Ideally, you don't want a tourniquet on for more than 2 hours. And so that kind of helps the medical care response people once they are able to come and help. So now I'm going to just focus on the active shooter specific response strategies. And everything I say can apply to any place. So even though we work in healthcare facilities, you can be in an active shooter situation at any point in your life. And so these strategies really apply for anywhere. Unfortunately, we know this is a growing trend. Dr. Ahmed had preface and talk about how there's more and more events that we're seeing, and also just, the media is now reporting it more and more. So we're really increasing our awareness of all the active shooter events that are happening. So we know that this is unfortunately a growing trend. And we also know that healthcare facilities have been targets of shootings in this year alone and in previous years. So when we're talking about active shooter training, just understand that there really is not one demographic profile of an active shooter. And understanding these people, they have come with the intention of killing people, of harming people. So somebody, an active shooter, this is not the person to try to apply the de-escalation strategies that I spoke about earlier in the workplace violence section. Somebody coming with a gun with the intention to kill is not going to be somebody that you can talk down. Most cases, an active shooter, unless they have like a very specific person they're targeting or department they're targeting, there may not be any particular pattern or method to their selection of victims. And then these active shooter situations often are going to evolve really quickly. They'll often, the actual shooting will be over pretty fast. That's not always the case though. We know in sort of news recently, there have been incidents that have lasted a while. But especially in a healthcare facility, even though the actual active shooter part, the shooting may be over within a few minutes, you have to understand that police are going to come and they may have your facility on lockdown for a very long time. They may be doing like a unit by unit search. And so you really need to think about when you're sort of planning your clinical areas and preparing them for active shooter situations, especially if, shelter in place ends up being the choice that a unit makes. Understand that this may be hours where you are on lockdown as police continues to search and make sure that the scene is safe. And so really understanding what does that continuity of patient care look like if a unit really is going to be locked down for hours, even if the event has been resolved within a couple of minutes. Again, police may have you locked down for a very long time. This is, at Downstate, we use plain language. Our code is active shooter. Our overhead announcement will say active shooter in the location, and it'll do that 3 different times. We also have other sort of disaster communication platforms such as Send Word Now. And so I just want you to kind of think about in your facility, what is the way that staff is notified of an active shooter situation? In the past, our facility, we had a code, it was called Code Silver, and it meant active shooter. And then when we surveyed our staff in the last year or so, most of them didn't actually know what Code Silver meant. And there was a little bit of hesitancy to move to plain language active shooter because some people believed it would create panic. But really the national kind of trend is just that people having immediate situational awareness about what's going on is much more important than the panic that will ensue by saying active shooter. Saying Code Silver does not help anybody if they don't know what it means. And then think about all the people on a facility that are not staff there, right? Patients, visitors, everybody really needs to be empowered with this knowledge. Everybody needs to know that there's an active shooter happening. So again, I really, I encourage you to review with your own hospital what the overhead code is, and I encourage you to change it to something that's plain language if it's not. And then also think about how you're communicating to your other staff. So imagine a really large campus, there may be areas where they don't get to hear the overhead announcement, or you may have staff that isn't physically on campus, but need to kind of know that there's an active shooter event happening. And so think about sort of redundancy and how you're communicating with staff and what sort of IT and mechanisms you use for that. So the response for active shooter, the verbiage that we use is run, hide, fight. Other facilities and other trainings may use different words, but they essentially mean the same thing. And this is really, run, hide, fight is really the order of how you would prioritize your response if you're able to. So if you're able to, run is the best first thing to do. If you're not able to run, then hiding is the next best thing to do. And then as a last resort, fighting. And so when we talk about running, really you're creating distance between you and the shooter. We always remind people, do not take your belongings with you. And you want to make sure that you've thought about this ahead of time, right? So your staff, especially if you work in the same area every day, you really should understand all the different escape routes and have a plan in mind. A lot of this active shooter training is about trying to decrease the time of panic, which everybody is going to kind of naturally feel in this event, and decrease the time to to action. And so part of that is really thinking about this ahead of time and preparing and having a plan in mind. And you'll see that that alone will have a really big impact in sort of your ability to kind of activate your staff and get them to respond. You want to run, and a lot of this training is about making sure that, you know, what are all the things, activities that an individual staff can do to prevent them from becoming a victim. So again, running is the safest thing. You have to understand that not everybody is going to want to run. Not everybody is going to feel comfortable running, or other people may just still be in that panic mode a little bit longer than you are. And so again, we want you to always, you know, it's going to be a personal decision in the moment, but the idea is that we really want to empower staff to do everything they can to make sure they are not a victim. And so understand that other staff, patients, visitors, they may not feel comfortable to run. It's okay to run if other people aren't, if you feel comfortable, if you feel like it's safe to do. And then understand that police officers, if they're on scene, their goal is to take out the active shooter. And so you want to do everything you can to make it so that they don't confuse you with the active shooter. So make sure you're not carrying any weapons, that your hands are visible, that you're following the instructions of the police officers. And then again, as you're running from the scene, you may encounter wounded people. And so the idea is that we really want to make sure that all of our staff don't become victims themselves. And so you need to think about whether it's actually safe for you to stop and help somebody. So if there's active shooting going on, then really it's probably not safe for you to stop and try to help people. But again, that's a personal decision. But again, just the idea is that if everybody is sort of making sure that they don't themselves become a victim, that's going to help our overall response. Now, hiding. So sometimes running is not going to be feasible. And so what hiding does is it gives time for the police to help stop the situation before you become a victim yourself. And think about the difference between covering and concealing, right? So you can hide yourself where no one can see you. But if you can create coverage, if you can hide behind things that could potentially stop a bullet, that's better. And again, this does require some thought ahead of time. So you want to make sure that your staff and that you personally are looking at your clinical space, understanding, okay, where's the best place to hide? And where's an even better place that would actually give me some cover? Which are the areas that, which are the walls that are glass versus cement or concrete walls? Which are the doors that lock? Which are the doors that open in versus out? Really just understanding your space and again, having a plan. In the moment, you're gonna be panicked. And the more you've thought about this ahead of time, the more you've discussed with your staff ahead of time, then the faster you're gonna switch from panic to action. And then I think in a lot of sort of patient care areas, shelter in place may be kind of the only option or may be the best option. And so again, you really need to work with your actual units in your different areas. Again, it doesn't even have to be their clinical areas, just across your campus. You're going to have a lot of different spaces like your pharmacy area, your administration offices. But again, you need to think ahead of time. You need to speak with the staff ahead of time and discuss what does shelter in place look like in this unit? What are the doors that lock? What are the rooms that, again, will provide the best cover from potential bullets? Ideal hiding spaces. So making sure that you're out of the active shooter's view, making sure that you're not trapped if they are able to kind of enter the area that you're hiding, doors that lock, barricading those doors, and then thinking about all the ways to make your area quiet, right? So silencing all medical equipment that makes noises, all personal equipment that makes noises. And again, what does shelter in place look like in a clinical area where you're also providing clinical care? And so again, all this really takes some thought and training and planning ahead of time. And then as a last resort, it may come to fighting. I usually will tell staff that if you're already hiding, that you should at least have a plan to fight if the active shooter is able to find you and kind of get through your barricading. Just have a plan. You really want to use anything that you available to hit or throw at the shooter. And if there is, if you're hiding with more than one person, then you're gonna have a much more effective response if you do something coordinated. So if you're hiding with other people, then take some time, make sure you're each armed and have a plan, okay? And your plan can look like, okay, I'm gonna go for the eyes, you're gonna go for this part of him. We do training in our facility where we actually have prop guns and we actually teach our staff how to disarm somebody with either a rifle or handgun. And so then we sort of tell them that, if you're a couple of people in a room and you're hiding, to have a plan, okay, this person is going to disarm while this person is going to throw objects at their eye to distract them. And again, a coordinated response is going to give you a much better chance at survival and about taking down the attacker. And again, if you decide to fight, you really have to commit to that action. You have to be as aggressive as possible, because again, this is somebody who's armed. Most likely, this is not going to be a special, forces trained person. And so a really sort of committed, aggressive, coordinated attack by staff will give you your best chance at disarming and taking down the shooter. And then don't just assume that somebody else has called 911. Unless you actually hear that there are police on the scene, go ahead and call law enforcement, and understand that law enforcement's purpose is to stop the active shooter. Their purpose is not to interact with you, to help you, to answer your questions. Their purpose is to just find the active shooter. So you kind of have really two jobs when dealing with law enforcement during this response. Number one is don't get in their way. So let them do what they got to do. Do not distract them. Don't get in their way. And then the other, maybe even more important thing for you personally, is don't make yourself confused with the active shooter. So make sure that it's very clear that you are not the active shooter. So for instance, if you have disarmed them, make sure you're not holding the gun. Make sure your hands are always available, are always visible when you see law enforcement. And just understand that their response, it could be very, just situation dependent. So they may be using pepper spray or tear gas. They may be shouting commands. They may even be pushing people out of the way. But really their job is to stop the active shooter. Your job is to, number one, not be confused as the active shooter, and number two, to not get in their way. And so this is just a couple more, things to think about when there is law enforcement. So, ways to make it so that you are not confused with the active shooter. You want to be as calm as possible, have your hands visible, avoid making sort of quick, loud gestures towards police or law enforcement. And again, this is not a time to stop and interact with them. Just, you want to run for the exit, run in whichever direction they're telling you to. And then we know how stressful really disaster events can be, but active shooter event in particular is really going to produce sort of this characteristic sort of psychological symptoms and reactions. And so it's a good idea to think about having some sort of a crisis response team for your staff and for your patients and visitors, if either any type of disaster, but especially something as sort of emotional and scary as an active shooter. And what does that disaster response team look like? That crisis response team gets sort of the psychiatric department involved, and considering sort of what debriefing looks like during these events. And then also I like to just sort of include the basic principles of psychological first aid, which is essentially just some principles that we apply to help kind of in sort of the immediacy of an event. How can we kind of decrease or the stress and anxiety reaction after either any type of disaster, especially an active shooter. And there's many psychological first aid trainings available. But the 5 kind of pillars of psychological first aid to sort of think about in the moments and the hours after an active shooter event. When people are really stressed after experiencing such a traumatizing experience, the best thing you can do is sort of help create sort of a sense of safety. So sort of look at the environment. It's probably going to be in chaos immediately after any sort of event like this. So how can we kind of calm down the environment, reduce the chaos, and sort of give people a sense of safety? And then the second kind of big important thing is to empower people to help kind of take care of themselves. So I think sort of the old paradigm was, we're gonna, these people are vulnerable, we need to do everything for them, we need to hand feed them things that they need. But the idea is that, they're vulnerable, and to help sort of decrease their sense of vulnerability is to empower them and make them sort of self-sufficient. So if you have a group of staff and you're still sort of have to stay on campus, give them tasks, give them things to do. Don't just sort of try to do everything for everybody, but really sort of give people sort of a sense of independence and their own sort of ability to do their own problem solving and self-care, and sort of give them the tools for that. And then we want to sort of create an atmosphere of hope and calm. So really focus on all the things that are doing. What are the next steps going forward? What are the actions that we need to do going forward? And And all this is going to kind of let people, again, help them de-escalate, decrease their anxiety, and now kind of move forward rather than focusing on the event that just happened. And then creating connection. So on the scene itself, right? So where are places that people can kind of gather and be together and connect if they need to? Not everybody is going to want to talk immediately after a stressful event like this. So it's not about forcing connections, forcing people to talk, but giving them a space, a safe place where they can connect with their colleagues. And then also creating some sort of process or place where they can go to connect with their loved ones. You can imagine how worried people are going to be about their loved ones, how loved ones are going to be worried about their own, staff members on campus. And so setting up, an area where they can kind of connect with home and family and friends is another kind of key principle to this psychological first aid. And then a couple of considerations, a little more detail specifically about, patients, visitors, right? So you want to practice patient evacuations for all of your different unit types, right? So if it is possible to evacuate a patient unit, if the staff thinks that they have time and it's safe to do that, make sure that your staff is trained to do that and that they understand the different equipment that you use to evacuate and the different routes of escape and what evacuating patients looks like more than just evacuating themselves. And then practice locking down units. Sometimes shelter in place is going to be your unit's only option. So make sure that your staff is actually practicing locking down, and have staff practice barricading the units. And then have your hospital security actually try to break through the barricades and actually see how they do in barricading their units. And identify ahead of time what's the best place to shelter in place, right? So which areas in the unit have the thickest concrete walls, have doors with locks, and where are the first aid supplies? Make sure those are readily available. And some facilities even create safe and panic rooms that staff can kind of run to, that's specifically designed to help make barricading easier. And then again, I've sort of emphasized before, but stop the bleeding training is really important for staff, especially your non-clinical staff, just making sure they understand the basic principles of this, and then making sure that you have tourniquets and first aid kits readily available across the campus. And again, think about all those non-clinical areas that are just as vulnerable to active shooter events. And so make sure that, that you guys have the tools that you would need to respond and save as many lives as possible. And then again, communicating during an active shooter event. So review the overhead codes. Again, the national trend is to use plain language for this. And then having sort of redundant disaster communication plans. So how are you communicating to staff that are off campus or to staff that maybe are in parts of the campus that they don't hear overhead announcements? And then really sort of maintaining a culture of safety in your department, in your unit, in your facility is going to go a long way towards helping mitigate these events. So make sure that people are always wearing identifiable IDs, consistently locking doors, and then really empowering your staff to report suspicious activity. And then again, as employees, you're going to know your facility best. And so understand that patients, visitors, or rotators, they may not know the best exit. And so try to direct people as best as you can, because you really may be the person who knows active shooter was in this unit. And I know that that unit is west of us. And so we're going to take the east exit. Right? And you can imagine a patient visitor may not know that. So really make sure that, that you're sort of sharing your knowledge as far as the best places to run and hide. And then, you're going to treat patients to the level of care that's possible given the situation. And that's going to really be situation dependent. And then what's really, tough conversation to have with staff is that you really have to kind of emotionally prepare staff to discontinue patient care when it's not safe for them to do. And that, they may have to abandon patients. And then, but understand that not all staff is going to feel comfortable abandoning vulnerable patients. And so make sure that you still empower staff with the tools they need if they choose not to leave their patients. And again, that's going to be a personal choice. And some people think they know what they would do in the heat of the moment, but they might surprise themselves. And so to really make sure that you are giving them the tools they need to run and save themselves that way, but also if they choose that they can't leave their unit, either because it's not safe to do so or because they choose not to, then empowering them and let them understand, well, here are the tools, here are the things that you're going to do if you're going to shelter in place. And as I said earlier, be prepared to be in lockdown for a really long time. Again, the event itself may be over in minutes, but police may have the hospital locked down for hours. You may be sheltering in place and barricaded in your unit for a long time. And so again, what does that mean as far as continuity of care? Once sort of you know that the active shooter part is over, but that you're going to be stuck in your unit for a prolonged period of time. And so just some questions that, you know, I want you to sort of think about, and in the chat box or when we do the Q&A at the end of the session, I'd love to hear from the moderators and from anybody in the audience. But think about, okay, I'm curious what people's overhead codes are, if everybody is using sort of plain language or if people are still using things like code silver. And I'm curious about different facilities processes for managing patients that have a history of violence during admission. So we have a few frequent flyers at our hospital that we know whenever they come, either due to like having dementia, developmental delays, psychological, psychiatric diagnoses, we know they often will do sort of some degree of workplace violence, whether they've been physical with staff. We have one patient who almost every time he gets admitted, he tries to start a fire in his room. So we kind of have patients that we know. And so we're creating processes where we're flagging these patients when they're being admitted. And we're actually still working out our own protocols of like what that actually means. What does it mean as an ER physician or as an upstairs doctor or as a nurse when I'm taking care of a patient that's been flagged as having a history of workplace violence? What am I doing different? What procedures am I doing different? How am I making sure the environment of the room is as safe as possible? And so again, we're actually sort of putting a lot of these protocols together. So I would love at the end of this to actually hear feedback from you guys. If you have processes that you've used that have worked, I'd love to hear what you guys have come up with. And then think about what are the methods of active shooter and workplace violence training that you're doing for staff. When are you reaching them? How frequently are you doing this? Are you doing it just in lectures? Are you doing it on the unit? At our facility, everybody gets trained during their orientation, and then every year each staff member has to do a mandatory sort of compliance training that covers a lot of things, including this. And then we also offer sort of more 2-hour classroom-based, more immersive trainings where we actually teach people how to disarm weapons, and we practice with the stop the bleed tourniquets, we practice de-escalating each other. And then we also go on to the units, and we sort of have a goal where each year every unit gets trained by our University of Police on active shooter and workplace violence response, where they actually get to practice in their unit and practice barricading. So think about all the different mechanisms and the way that you're offering these trainings to staff. And then also de-escalation training, you know, what methods of de-escalation training are you doing? I worked for a while in a psychiatric facility where we were taught like therapeutic holds. And so right now my hospital is sort of looking at different training for that and trying to decide which of our departments do we think staff would need to be trained on therapeutic hold, especially places where they work with psychiatric patients. But again, I'll be curious at the end, either in your chats or if you want to, you know, email me your thoughts or experiences with these different types of things, or if you have questions about how we're organizing our workplace violence committee and what activities the committee is actually doing, then please feel free to email me. And then at the end of this session, I hope to kind of hear from everybody about what's happening at your facility. So with that, Dr. Amit, do you want me to take questions now, or would you rather Dr. Aquila go and we'll save them for the end?
I think we'll make an exception this time because both your topics are usually, I finish the questions from after the first speaker, but because both your topics are kind of similar and actually forms a complete package, let's do Dr. Bonnie's talk and then do the questions after that. What about that? Do you agree, Dr. Arkula?
Yes. And I'm
Okay.
going to start sharing my screen right now.
So let me just tell you how what a wonderful, I mean, what a wonderful grasp of the subject you have, and I'm waiting to hear from your mentor who taught you everything. I mean, we are absolutely so honored and actually lucky to have two of the greatest experts in this field, especially being in New York City. You know what kind of preparedness you need to have. We have all seen scenes after 9/11 and so on and so forth. But it actually now echoes to every state of the country, and because this can happen to anyone. Just a quick answer to Dr. Pia's question. My hospital does not have any active shooter protocol except for the ER doctors. They get, I think, some kind of training, but we have not. And a second thing is that I'm not aware of a code silver in my hospital. So that goes to prove that we don't really have it. Now, I'm not in a big, huge academic center. That may be different, but I'm in a fair 350 bedded hospital, which is fair sized hospital. And you know, that's something which I'm sure we will address that after Dr. Bonnie's talk, and we can address that and have other people answer to that if they raise their question. Please put your question and answer in the chat box. You don't have to put it in the question and answer box. You can put it in the chat box. At the end, I'll ask those questions. And if anybody really wants to speak on Dr. Pia's questions, please put a raise hand or something like that, and I'll try to get to you after the question and answers are done at the end of the talk. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Bonnie Arquilla. She is a professor of the Emergency Medicine Emerita, state of SUNY downtown. And she joined SUNY downstate in, not downtown, downstate in 2000. Her area of interest has been disaster medicine and emergency preparedness. She was the medical director of emergency medicine and disaster management at University Hospital until December 2020. She founded the New York Institute All Hazard Preparedness at SUNY downstate in 2003 and worked with the New York Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, the Greater New York Hospital Association. She has extensive national and international experience in emergency management and emergency medical education, where she provides consultation on system problems and disaster readiness to local and national governments. Dr. Arquilla is the founder of the Disaster Preparedness Fellowship Program at SUNY downstate. Wow, I didn't know that there was a fellowship on that. Wow, that's great. Additionally, Dr. Arquilla has been both a primary and secondary grant reviewer with the Centers of Disease Control. Dr. Arquilla is a member of WHO Southeast Asia Educational Work Group and has been working with the World Cup since 2009. Would love to have some tickets for that.
I don't get to go to any games.
Dr. Arquilla has been awarded the great honor of being Indo-US Health and Medicine Hall of Fame inductee and will be serving as the Secretary General for 2022 WACEM in Malaysia in November. Wow. We are honored to have you, Dr. Arquilla. Please go ahead, and we are dying to hear you.
I want to begin by thanking the organization for asking us to talk. I am a standard bearer that we need to prepare, and if we're prepared, maybe we won't have to respond, although the last couple of years have not proved very good for my attitude with the pandemic and the fact that active shooters and shootings across the United States have skyrocketed in the last few years. I am really sorry that we have this topic. I wish we didn't. But one of the things I did find out is that doctors don't know very much about firearms. So we're going to spend some time with that. This is my old university. I am a professor emerita now, and I only have to do things that I really like. So you can see what I like to do with my Saturday afternoons. I want to send special thanks out to Mark Silverberg. He and I have worked on this. He's an excellent emergency physician and really is very good with ballistics and all the training about that, and an excellent educator. So let's just understand a few things about the active shooter person. Number one, all this conversation that we need better mental health care is probably not going to help our situation with active shooters. And it's very difficult to identify them before the fact. We also live in a free society where we really can't lock up everybody that says something mean about you. And so it makes it really difficult for us. These are not reasonable people. They are not somebody that you can have a conversation with. Most of them are now being considered in a new kind of conversation of death by police. So they're actually going to go and kill people, and they expect to be killed themselves. They do not expect to live through this experience. The number of people who've actually lived as active shooters through it is minuscule in the comparison. So these people are going about a suicide mission of their own. Don't try to talk to them. That's not the conversation that you can have. I wanted to talk about a little bit about the deadliest shootings, but I feel like it's probably better to take a step back and just consider all the poor people in the last few weeks that unfortunately are not with us and don't get to have a natural death. So I'm not going to really talk about that today. I don't need to convince you that we have to worry about active shooter, which when I was doing these talks in 2004 or 5, I really did have to convince people that it was important. But I do want to spend a little bit of time because hospital shootings are not that much out of the norm. And you kind of need to know where they're happening. And they tend to be happening more in the psychiatric units, but they also happen in the emergency department. They happen in the parking lot of the building. And so the hospital, a place that is used to being a response, becomes the victim. And so this is really important. Now you wonder why this data that Pia and I has shown you is so a little bit old. Like, why are you showing me data that's more than 10 years old? It's because there was a gag order on the production of this data. It was a law that was put into effect during the Bush administration that just got repealed at the very end of the Obama administration. And then unfortunately, the Trump administration put in an executive hold. So we're really only getting really good data on this kind of violence in the last 18 months. So look for lots more. So just so you all know, just a second, I just have to do one thing. There's lots of guns in America. The small arms survey showed that the civilians alone account for 393 million. That's about 46% of the people who have guns. Now, I don't have a gun. I don't know anybody who does. I find this absolutely bizarre, but that's it. So we're looking at lots and lots of firearms that are available. And some of the active shooters get them by accident. Unfortunately, most of them do not. Who is at risk within the healthcare facility? And it's really the most at risk are the mental health professionals and the mental health custodians. And this is for violent acts. This data may very well change based on what happened in Oklahoma about 12 days ago, but we'll see. So run, hide, fight is a common conversation. Dr. Daniel, thank you very much for reviewing it with everybody. But one of the things that came out of the Texas shooting was the two of the little children who did make it through, they really did a hide number and they really played dead. So think about that, because running is not always an option. However, I do want to spend a minute here and say, know where you are, know your plans, look at what's going on so that you can figure out where you can run for every unit you're in. There are some units that are more danger in a healthcare facility than others. The MRI machine, you certainly don't want somebody going in there with a gun, things like that. So you need to think about that. You also need to think about your operating theaters. You know, they can't always stop a procedure in the middle, or the dialysis center. Those are areas that it's really important that they need to be able to be secured and barricaded. So there's a lot of bullets on this slide right now. And I want to bet that most of you, I certainly didn't before I started giving these lectures and really getting educated in various places, how bullets work. They're basically a small explosion. So you have the cartridge, and you see here is the cartridge, the entire thing. There is a case. What the case does, it holds gunpowder, plain old-fashioned gunpowder from the 16th century. There is a primer, is at the bottom of the gunpowder. The primer explodes. The primer makes the gunpowder have a small explosion. That explosion propels the bullet. And that's what we have. So we have our case, our primer, our propellant, and our projectile. So bullet functions, the bullet cap and case are one part of it. A hammer hits the primer down here at the bottom. There's a small hole, there's a flash of an explosion, which sets off your powder, which propels your bullet. It creates a gas that pushes that bullet forward. This is the same functioning as when guns were originally invented: a primer, a powder, a bullet. However, human beings are really good at making deadly things. And so we've gotten much better at our bullets. That's what a normal handgun sounds like. I'll put it back on. Okay. These are various types of bullets. And you see, some of them are very large and some of them are quite small. I'm going to spend a couple of seconds and go into them in a tad more detail. So bullets are identified based on their millimeters. In Europe, they do it in millimeters. We do it in millimeters or sometimes other things. This here on the far right is a machine gun bullet, okay? And what you have here is a Nitro Express. Over on the far top left, that is for a small handgun. And the 38 Special is what they use in all the detective shows, or the Magnum, which means that it's the size of it is a 44 millimeter. These are various, we also do it in hundredths of inches. So, you know, you can't keep everything organized. And so the British do it in one way, Americans do it in another. And then these are the various types of bullets, various sizes. So you can imagine they're going to make very different kinds of injuries into your patients, which is what I'm concerned with. So you have the millimeter, you also have the caliber, which is 30 calibers is equal to 7.62 millimeters. And these are kind of what the sizes are. So if this is back to the old-fashioned physics, the weight and the velocity equals your energy. And if you look at the bottom right hand, it's the heaviest, it's the fastest, and it's going to create the most energy and the most damage to tissue. These bullet components and designs are meant to do one thing, which is to tear through flesh and create the most damage to the most flesh possible. There's also bullet fragments, and these bullets are designed to fragment within tissue, and so that they create more injury and more damage. And there you see the weight retention creates the penetration depth and the separation from the jacket, and then the fragmenting. And you see here a fragmented. On the right is bullets that have gone through a gel, and we can figure out how far they're going to go based on that. The gel is supposed to recreate human tissue, but as I don't need to tell you, every tissue is pretty different. Going through lung is going to be very different from going through bone, is very different from going through liver. So additional facts I want everybody to try to incorporate this afternoon is that rifles are much bigger than handguns. Hunting rifles are way different from assault rifles. They're completely different. Now, there's no reason for an assault rifle to exist in our daily life. They are for armies, and they should not be in any civilian's hand, in my opinion. And it's the difference between dead and really, really dead. I mean, it's an absurdity. Assault rifles are meant to do one thing: rip tissue apart and kill people as quickly as possible. Elephants are not always safe. When I was on safari, this is not a picture from that, but they really did run from them. And because this has been such a heavy topic, I thought you guys might enjoy a silly picture. So the design of the bullet really does matter as you, as healthcare providers and physicians, get ready to take care of these people and try to save as many lives as possible at the end of an active shooter event, or if these patients are coming to you from a school in your area. So how do bullets do their work? There's a rifling effect. There's a spin within the air. They don't really drill neatly. They're not clean. The kinetic energy, I don't want to give anybody heat waves, but this is one of the equations that we still know, was the weight times the velocity squared times 2. That's the kinetic energy that the bullet creates. Bullets transfer energy. So the powder transferred the energy of the explosion to the bullet, and the bullet is going to transfer that energy to the human tissue. So energy is measured in foot-pounds, which are joules. So this is a mechanism of injury, and you need to really be very careful with this. Stop the bullet. The body has stopped this bullet. There's a terminal ballistics here, but it's not just simple. It's not just a hole in the person's back. There's an impact, and with that impact is a change in what happens in that tissue based on that transfer of energy. So that it's donating energy into the body. And it slows by friction, so pushing the tissues aside. And the objects can deflect a bullet. Bone is very well known for deflecting bullets. So the tissue injury is what we're very concerned about, because inside you have multiple things happening. You have a crush injury, and then you have a shredding of the tissue. That's your primary cavity. But then it flings the tissue outward, which becomes your secondary cavity. It's a temporary cavity. It only lasts for 5 to 10 milliseconds, depending on the type of bullet, but there's a pulsation and a contraction with it. The tissue type determines the extent of injury. So lung and muscle are going to have far greater injury than than bone. This, I love this picture. This is a picture of what the cavity looks like when it's going through muscle or various tissues. See how much larger it is than the bullet, and see how, because the bullet is twisting and turning, and see how it's not coming out clean, and you have very different entry in the middle and then at the exit. This is an excellent picture of what a 7.6 millimeter bullet would do. The primary cavity, because it twists and turns, and then you have your secondary cavity. So there's a lot more injury than you realize happening to this tissue. It's called yaw or pitch and tumble. You can see that this is an important topic, so I'm giving you 3 slides on it. But the blast cavity size is very important based on the face size. So you have your permanent cavity and you have your temporary cavity. The tissue in that temporary cavity has been injured. This is another picture of what the cavitation can look like. So gun classification is important. They have handguns. I'm sorry that the spacing is a little off on this. I don't know why that was. It wasn't when I looked at it 10 minutes before we talked. So then there's handguns. So there's automatic handguns and there's revolvers. There's a rifle, which is a hunting rifle or an assault rifle, and then there's a shotgun. These are different, and it's not unimportant that physicians know these things. So this is what a semi-automatic pistol looks like. You hold back the trigger and it continues to fire until you release the trigger. That's what semi-automatic is. You do have to occasionally recock it. This is an automatic pistol. And you see here, the trigger is different. You don't have to release this trigger the way the other one was. So let me just go back to the primary. This one, you have to release it, hold it and release it. It will fire more than one bullet with a hold, but it will stop ultimately. Whereas this one, the automatic, does not stop until you release your trigger. These are revolvers, and each one of those fires a single shot. And people do still use these. This is a hunting rifle. This is something that is done with great care by the hunter. They do not want to actually do any tissue damage to the animal that they're hunting. They want to take their time to line it up. You see they have a telescope there. And so it's a calmer thing. Now, This does not mean that snipers, a la like some of what happened in Las Vegas, he did have some hunting rifles there as well, do not use these for active shooter events, but they have not been used typically in the last 18 months of the many active shooters we've had in the United States. This is an M16 assault rifle. There's no reason for this to ever be on the street. These fire as many bullets as possible, as fast as possible. And as you'll see here, aiming it is not relevant at all. You don't hold it where you look through the barrel of the sight. You just simply hold the trigger, sweep, and until you've run out of ammunition. So gunshots, there's various types of them, and you'll see them on the right. They have pellets. They don't tend to have rifling, and they'll have a choke on them as well. So pattern of injury, as physicians and healthcare providers, does matter. You want to see where the bullets went in. And then entry versus exit. People say that they can tell. Assume you can't tell. Generally, the entrance is smaller. Generally, the exit is larger and can be stellite. But bullets have no rules. They haven't read the book. Don't count on that. Simply say in your documentation, there's a bullet hole in the front, there's a bullet hole in the back. Don't make conjecture of what you've seen. This is part of your documentation, and it's very important because not everyone's going to get a crash course in documentation when they're taking care of active shooter events. And if we as physicians mess up our documentation, it could hurt the case that the Army may have, or the police may have against them. You can say likely, and you can say powder burn, and you can say abrasion ring. And so this is a stellite injury, which is consistent or likely an exit wound. And this is a powder burn, which is probably a very close to the tissue, probably not an active shooter, probably an execution with an abrasion ring. And this is very typical of an execution type injury. So if I get nothing else through, they don't obey the rules. Small round exits, no tumble, there'll be skin stretched, large exit, muzzle near the skin, indirect knit, you just don't know. So this is our small round with no tumble. This is our large entrance because of the way the muzzle was near the skin and an indirect hit. This one, is it an in or an out? Don't assume, because you don't know where that bullet came from. And I've seen bullets start in the groin and finish in the foot. They take the path of least resistance down the fascial planes of a leg. As you see here, and this is the secondary blast injury, because I was talking to you, remember I was talking to you about the primary and the secondary, and this is the secondary blast injury from this gunshot wound. Here we have a gunshot wound to the head, and you see here in the forehead, and this is the x-ray of this patient. I did have permission for this patient, how it entered and left, and you'll see a lot of fragmentation here. Don't assume that they're beyond salvage. The most remarkable things happen to gunshot wounds. Just like you don't know what's going to happen to the bullet, you don't know what's going to happen to that victim. Here we have, to the surgeons in the house, a lung injury. Lungs have such great vasculature that they are very problematic, and they really don't do well with bullets, but people do recover from them. And here we have, this is obviously autopsy, liver cavitation. I have personally sewn up a gunshot wound to the heart, and the patient did walk out of the hospital. So if they crack the chest, there's very good possibility, if you still have a heartbeat, that hearts can do all right. Excuse me just a second. This is a bone injury. These are really a mess. This patient will do very well from traction, and you want to get them immobilized. They may or may not need a tourniquet. There's no way of telling from this picture. Here we have a a patient who had bullet wedged in the joint, and as a result did have lead toxicity and did need to be treated for it ultimately. This is another very large bullet, as you see here, in a joint space area, which was removed with great care and caution. So please watch what you write, only what you see. So one gunshot wound to the chest, one to the back. Don't say it's not 2 entries. It could be 2 bullets inside them. You just don't know. Never, never, never speculate. And if you're signing out to a consultant, if you're signing out to somebody who's going to take over the case, who's more attuned to these kinds of injuries, don't speculate with them either. Just say what you saw, write what you saw, no more, no less. Being wrong can turn a case, but also being wrong can prevent care as quickly as possible. And I don't mean to say this to this audience. I know that you are a really sophisticated audience, but I feel that I got to remind myself, so I might as well remind everybody else. So a few more hints. Guns actually do not hold fingerprints well. The casing on the guns do hold prints well. Please don't handle them. You know, try to pick them up with a forceps, get them in a plastic bag. Unique markings, rifling, misalignments, they will show up on your casings. The secondary projectile can also be clothing, which that bullet has pushed into it. These things are really, really dirty wounds. Consider them dirty. And never wash. If you happen to get the active shooter in your department, don't wash their hands. Police and FBI will be very aggravated with you. They want their hands as they are. They can get a lot of information off of just even the fingernail. So don't wash their hands, which is our natural thing to want to do. The physical exam, count all the holes. Look for your vascular, make sure to do a good vascular exam on every extremity that they really got good sensation. X-ray the areas. It's okay to do too many X-rays. Do not worry about that. And holes plus bullets, you really should have an even number. So this was 2 gunshot wounds to the neck. I'm not sure. It's 2 holes to the neck. And what we found here was 1 bullet had gone up there, and as you see, it lodged just underneath the cranium, and the other bullet we had to then go find, and it was down in the abdomen. So you just don't know what a bullet's going to do. This one here is another example of them not obeying the rules. This looks like a graze injury, like, right, in and out. And actually, when we connected the dots, we found that it was not. So it's not, and this is not easy to do either. This is, you know, this is difficult, but it is important, and you really need to identify and make sure that you get every bullet that could possibly have attacked your patient. This is another example of the not following the rule. We found this bullet fragment actually from a patient who'd been, the first hole was in the belly, and there was no exit wound, so then we went hunting for it. This is a bullet that fragmented because it hit bone. So management of these patients. This is old news. There's nothing new here. It hasn't changed since I went to medical school, but please don't forget about it. You have to take care of your ABCs, and circulation is probably the most important ABC there is on a gunshot wound, depending on where the bullet has gone. You must control the bleeding, you must resuscitate, and don't forget, you can over-resuscitate these people. That is not out of the realm of normality. They need blood way more than they need fluids. And you can use untyped blood. It depends on your facility, but your active shooter management protocol should be, you should be able to use O negative. Give these patients tetanus shots, give them antibiotics. These are filthy wounds. There are secondary missiles in there. Angiograms are fantastic, and don't forget your TXA. It's cheap, it's easy, it works. Is this a good way to tie a tourniquet? No, this is wrong. The tourniquet is way too large. It's not creating the best pressure. You're not getting enough pressure on the arm. This is the wrong way to do it. You want a lot of pressure at the wound site. And as you'll remember from Dr. Pia's talk, you don't want the tourniquet that far away from the wound, and you don't want it over a joint. It looks like it's right over the elbow. So they did their best. They were trying hard. They wore gloves, thank goodness, but it's still not going to help this patient very much. So vascular injuries, are they just a flesh wound? Anybody else like Monty Python besides me? I know I date myself. Anyway, they can be very difficult to control. Vascular injuries are an issue and they are a problem. And you really want to put direct pressure on them. Don't forget to pack the wound. Get some visualization on it as soon as you can, as soon as you've got a buddy and you're safe. So clot enhancers, I do not by any way, shape, or form say that this is one to have. It's just a picture of a clot enhancer. I get no money from anybody, but clot enhancers do work, and it would be nice if they were in your kit. And see, you can really tell that I have no pharmaceutical or political anything. I'm giving lots of choices from them. Whatever your P&T committee decides to get, that's what they should get. So here's an example of an angiogram, and you see here, I'm sorry, I went a little fast on that. You see there the vascular injury. This they did with the popliteal artery, and these pictures are from the operating theater. So let's review. Cartilage, cartridge equals the case plus the primer plus the powder plus the bullet. That is a cartridge. And police officers will be so impressed with you if you know that. Kinetic energy is what a part of the problem with gunshot wounds. A rifle is far more deadly than a handgun and more accurate. The greater the kinetic energy caused by the greater the handgun, by the bigger the cartridge and the bullet, the more damage you're going to have to your tissue. There's always two cavities. There's a primary and a secondary cavity. Don't forget to treat that secondary cavity. It's a stretchy versus non-compliant tissues. They respond differently to this insult. And ABCs, but please control the bleeding and get these patients definitive care. Make sure that they've activated the trauma team. They've called in the anesthesia teams to open up extra operating ORs. Make sure that there's staff, as I like to say, circle the wagons, load the boat, get as many people possible as you can. So elements of your plan, you need to understand what your lockdown procedures are. You need to integrate your incident command with them and give information to agencies. No healthcare provider should be responsible unless they've been designated the information officer for the hospital to talk to anybody. And you don't even need to talk to the police, even though they flash a badge in your nose. You can tell them that you're very sorry, you're only doing patient care, and at this point, they're going to have to speak to someone from hospital administration. Let those guys in the C-suite earn their salaries. Special considerations, patients that cannot move easily, ICU, NICU, dialysis, those are all patients that they can't move, the team may need to go to them. The emergency department, there's not a lot of places to go usually. Surgical areas, operating rooms, operating theaters, and don't forget those high hazardous areas, the MRI. The kitchen is a pretty dangerous place, and if you have a dispute going on down there, it's problematic. And then there are regulatory areas. Pharmacies can lock their doors. They're about, I was actually talking to a pharmacist not long ago. They've got about the best situation. They can lock their door and nobody can get into them because they're protecting narcotics. Don't forget, if you happen to be one of the decision makers in your facility, about your offsite clinics and your small little independent places. The events that happen in those places is usually a disgruntled family member, a disgruntled ex-employee, an old boyfriend. They come in and people are not ready for them. And you need to have a code response team. So rescue and treatment of the victims, early entry by fire and EMS. There's a whole new thing going on in New York City Fire and New York City Police that they're bringing the EMS earlier than they used to because they don't want patients waiting too long. Activate the trauma center, not just for your individual facility, but for the community. Some of these patients that are just, upset and stuff, they can go to an outside facility that can handle them. And you really want to do that. And that should be a community-wide response, which is one of the things Dr. Daniel is very active in Brooklyn, and I used to be for the city. So the media is not my friend, but they can be a lot of the problem. However, you can turn them around and make them part of the solution by making them feel important and giving them somebody else to talk to. The message should always be coordinated. We're not talking to anybody. We're not doing anything. Go to the public information officer. And then the public information officer, if that happens to be you, contact them frequently, give them messages, tell them what's going on, and your family reunification center should be nowhere near your patient care areas. Patient and family response and communications, this is really important. You may have one victim, but there may be as many as 300 or 400 family victims involved in these events. And they come to the hospital and they need care and time. They don't need the same kind of care the patient who's bleeding is, but they do need care and time. And the data, the longitudinal data we have, even from Columbine, believe it or not, is entire communities and families have never recovered. And so this is a really important thing. And if there's anything we can do, Pia talked about it a little bit before, but you want to get them in a quiet area. You want to get them away. And the one thing that people really want is they want communication. Even if the communication is, I was here 12 minutes ago, I didn't have any information for you. I'm back and I still don't have any information, but I know you need it and it's a priority for me. Crime scene issues. This is a crime scene. If you get anybody that you ever treat in your life who happens to have a hole that looks like a gunshot, that's a crime scene. So you have to really be very careful of this. I know we're getting a little tight for time, so I'm going to speed up just a talk and talk about that. One second.
Dr. Bonnie, you have at least 10 more minutes, if
Oh,
not
okay.
more. We
Thank
talk.
you.
Don't cut it down. We have till 2 o'clock.
Okay, I'm as my friends that know me well know that I'm a real stickler for time. So, if the active shooter happens in your facility, you are now a crime scene. If the active shooter happened down the street, the patient that comes in is a crime scene. So either way, it's not good for us. But we want to do everything we can to really help our partners in the police. So we want to make sure that things are taken care of. However, no photographs, witness statements, you can only put them in quotes if you want to put them in the chart. Evidence collection, don't touch it if you can, and get it identified. Weird things have happened. You know, I've had a patient that I ended up wanted to look at his back, so I was rolling him, and not only did his gun come out, but his cell phone came out. And let me tell you that those police officers were very happy to get the cell phone before it turned off, and it really made a big difference. So you want to do that. If we are the victim, God forbid, I don't ever want to see or hear that for anybody here of the 82 people, then restoring essential services after taking care of the patient becomes our primary focus. You want to get things back to normal. People are still going to be having babies. People are still going to be having asthma attacks. There's still patients on the floor that need to get to nuclear medicine. You want to create normalcy. Normalcy helps people recover. You don't want to push people to make them do it fast, but you want to have it start looking as normal as possible, as quickly as possible. Israel has very good data on this. That's one of the reasons why their crime scene, if anything happens on the street, it is cleaned up in less than 30 minutes, and it's really cleaned up in about 10, because they want to have the community get back to normal as quickly as possible to decrease the PTSD that the community suffers from. So you really want to think about that and make sure that you get back to restoration of services. Is it easy? No, it's virtually impossible, but it needs to be the goal. And we need to impress upon the C-suite people how important it is for them to get it back to the goal, because they tend to have a hard time dealing with these kinds of issues. They're much more interested in things like the budget, which they can spend years on. So, and that gets into recovery. You need triage and treating of patients. Quite frankly, that's pretty easy for most of us. Notification of line, and notification line and talking to patient, we're more experienced in that. Accounting for every one of your staff and make sure that they're all safe, clean, hydrated, and they know that you're taking care of them or you're taking care of your buddy. That's an important part of recovery. One of the things that they always talk about in my friend in Las Vegas was the fact that there was a whole nursing supervising team who came in that did nothing but take care of the people afterward, because they realized that accounting for staff and taking care of staff is really important. Evidence recovery, we already talked about, and you may be asked to go to legal proceedings. Generally, that's why it's always good to write a pretty good note. Generally, you don't go to those legal proceedings for anywhere between 48 hours and 6 years. I still have a case, and I'm retired now for a year, of that I know that I'm going to get called in to give testimony. I think it's very good to have some sort of a memorial that people are able to do what they need to do. One of the key parts, and this is my opinion, one of the key parts of psychological first aid is people getting to talk, and they need to talk as long as they need to talk. And sometimes they need to tell the same story to each other, to their family member, to you, 4, 5, 6, 700 times. This is an important part of their recovery, and knowing that somebody is listening is important. If you personally find it too difficult to listen to that, yeah, I get it. I'm there with you. Find them someone that is their calling in life, is to give psychological support. It does not necessarily have to be a healthcare, it can be the chaplain, it can be people who just do this. The Red Cross is fantastic at this. And so this is a really important part of recovery, and recovery is just really vital. There's lots of ways to exercise this. There's table talk things, there's a line of duty death issues, there's all kinds of things. It's just endless. And Dr. Daniel, who I really admire, she always thinks of a new thing to do, another drill to help people really look at this. Domestic violence is unfortunately also a big part of the active shooter event. So this is a picture of what an active shooter drill looks like. And you see he's got the GoPro here and the people that are there and people watching. It's a really good idea, if your facility can do it, is to have the police, your local municipality, come in and do an active shooter, because there's nothing more noisy, even with this as a plastic gun, with it than having somebody pointed at you. It really makes you feel differently. So with that, I'm going to close out. I have to go to my, I did get a text during this, and I want to just say, I said in my, that I was one of the founding members of Indus EM, and in 2006, I was invited to go to the second Indus EM, and I've been going to India because I felt that I was enrolled that emergency medicine in India is really important. And so it's been a fabulous 15 plus years. In 2010, I believe it was recognized as a specialty. And now I don't even know how many programs there are. I have been giving boards and review courses and various other things. WASM grew out of Indus EM, and we are now international, and we were in Sri Lanka and Qatar and gosh, Dubai and various other places, and we'll be in Malaysia. And I really hope that if it's anywhere near possible that, you please let us know and come. Where they're going to be doing, Dr. Awi in Malaysia, who's the chair of the department there, does a fantastic 2-day course. It's called Top Com, and it's all about disaster preparedness and chemical weapons. And he brings in a group of people that from the United States and Malaysia and Australia, and it's a fantastic conference. So that's my little sales pitch for today. I'm going to stop my screen share. advanced, stop share, and turn it back over to our organizing committee. Thank you very much for inviting us, and we did it almost on time.
Amazing. I know.
I mean,
Amazing. I'm spellbound. I'm like
oh
goosebumps.
my
Like,
God, Dr. Arquilla, you hit it out of the ballpark, so to speak. You know, you just absolutely, or as we will say, you hit it out of the stadium. So we play cricket, not baseball. But I noticed a few things you said. You mentioned, you said Operation Theater, which brings me back to my India and UK days. We used to call it Operation Theater, not operating room. And so that was excellent. Well, anyway, I don't have to tell you that. The chat box is absolutely getting clogged with compliments for both of you, and you can just read that. I don't have to say that. And compliments like this makes our job worth it. I was hoping there would be much more people joining in, but Saturday morning sometimes is some things which they like to spend with family, and I can guarantee you all these lectures, this and all the lectures we have done for the whole year are there on AAPI website. This will be there in the next week or so, and you can go there and actually listen to it. So those who have missed it, and I've got several questions which I'm going to go one by one. I would have introduced Sagar at this point, but Sagar, being an emergency physician, was called in for attending to an urgent case. And, I hope it's not an active shooter. But also, I always mention this. It's amazing coincidence that I watch a show called Resident on TV. And Resident had an active shooter on one of the shows maybe 2 weeks ago. And, and we have had that same scenario. We did another topic several on hospice or something, and we had it in Resident. So we have been doing whatever topics, either we preempt it or they do before us. But bottom line is that we do topics which are focused on Resident, about hospice, about active shooter, about polypharmacy and drug overdose. Having said that, let me go back to the questions, and when Dr. Sagar gets back, I'll introduce him and he can conclude the whole thing. So everybody has applauded beautiful talk, and very, very timely. And some people have asked whether they can A, invite you to speak for their hospital, B, whether they can play this talk for their ER physicians. And I would just pitch that to you before we get started on the questions. Is that okay with you guys?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, we're funded by the
Awesome.
federal government, so everything we do is owned by the people of America, so not a problem. Or I was funded, I'm not anymore, but yes, absolutely. And we'd be delighted to come, we'd be delighted to Zoom or, wow, pay my airplane and I'll come visit you in person. So
There you go. Awesome. So
And
you heard it from
I did share our emails in the chat section, both Dr. Aquila and
Yes,
myself.
I saw that, Dr. Pia. Thank you so much. Okay, so you can actually communicate on email. So let's get to the questions. Dr. Gattu asked, is it typical that a hospital employed outpatient clinic would have the same overhead phrase / warning for training? Is it something is planned as an annual training? Like I said, my hospital doesn't have it. And so what are your thoughts on that?
I think that we should make sure that it's plain language everywhere. And the other thing is that if I say to you, active shooter, and you're with your sister and your mother, maybe your sister and mother can get the hell out of there, And so that's our thought, is we want as few victims available as possible. So if there's an active shooter in the emergency department and there are people over in the clinics 500 yards away, they can get out of the way as well. But if they hear Code Silver, then they're going to think they're on some television show and they're not going to know what that's about. So yes and yes. Yes, use plain language. And I believe every clinic should have training for, respiratory spread illness and active shooter. If those were the two that I was going to say that I would drill, that's what I would drill first. And I'll turn this over to Pia now, you drill for the thing you don't know anything about. You do you have your plan. We usually did a 3-year cycle of planning, but I'll give it to you, Pia.
Yeah, and I think that it was I saw the question in the chat box, and I'm glad somebody brought it up just because as I sort of discussed the activities of the hospital-based workplace violence committee, we're definitely making sure that we're including all of our off-site locations, our dialysis, affiliated dialysis centers, so really our affiliated community centers, nursing homes, but it's beyond just the inpatient, beyond just the emergency room. It's really just your entire campus and all your affiliated areas, absolutely. And that's why I talked about redundancy of communication, because not everybody in your facility is going to hear an overhead page. Even like certain upstairs units, they don't hear the overhead page, or certain ORs, they don't hear it very well. And definitely our administration areas and our offsite locations. So that's why you want to make sure there is other communication plans to communicate this. Again, Downstate uses a platform called Send Word Now, which I'm not advocating, but I'm just saying it's just an example of one of the IT solutions to quickly communicate the information to everybody who's employed by you.
Awesome. Great. Dr. Bharti asks, can AAPI represent to have a gun control? Only sell guns for self-defense, et cetera, background checks. This becomes political, and I don't know how much AAPI can do except for writing a letter of support. I'll pitch this over to Anupama as our president.
Yeah, I can answer that question. Yes, with the recent incidents in Tulsa, and there was one in California, like stab injuries, and the school incident, which is Uvalde, which is my neighbor town. So yes, we wrote letter to AMA. AMA is our lobbying organization. They are 501c4. So we are 501c3. We cannot do lobbying directly to any political leaders or anyone, lawmakers or policymakers. So we only have our voice heard to AMA. We already wrote the letter to the AMA Board of Trustee, Dr. Mukamala. He well received and our delegation is right now in AMA. They also got the letters, what AAPI wrote, and they have discussions going on today, tomorrow. So let's see what resolutions they will come up with. So we are waiting for that too from AMA. So
I would like to say, one thing that I think that all your thousands of members can do is to start discussing it as a physician. Sometimes we're afraid to bring up topics, but I really do believe that the more of us say, this is not okay, I don't believe in this, and this, just getting it out in the universe, that this is wrong and we need to stop doing this. I do believe that it might make some difference, and vote.
I agree with that. I think we need these more and more often, these talks, so that way we are more prepared. And yeah, preparedness is what we should learn. If this talk motivated some of our physicians who are here, more than 100 physicians, and I think we'll continue to do more of these talks, and then we'll make ourselves more acquainted. We need to learn how to protect ourselves. And the Tulsa event is very sad event. It shouldn't happen. One of the patients, his own patients, So these are the things we are going to see more and more often post-COVID, and as we see how mental illness is escalating now. And so I think we should be prepared about these talks. And thank you so much for doing these talks for us today. And go ahead with the questionnaire, Amit.
Yes, so Manoj has several thoughts and questions, very active in the chat box. Thank you, Manoj. He said that he works at the VA, and at the VA hospital, we're lucky to have federal police officers on duty 24 hours, 365 days with weapons. Most of them retired veterans themselves. In fact, they had one of their officers had subdued an active shooter about three years ago. And plus they have a panic button installed in the ER that goes to the police officer directly. So that's great to know. And they also have a chart alert in the EMR about a violent patient when that patient arrives at the hospital, and it's attended by police officers. Also, we have a weapons check by federal police officer at the entrance of the hospital. So he feels most safe, and I agree. Why not? That's something which obviously we would feel safe being in such a hospital. So what do you suggest?
I do want to say, however, and the VA is definitely a leader in this, but there's different rules to going and getting care at a VA hospital than there is at a free a free open space hospital, a county hospital or city hospital, they have more leeway being federal property in order to search people and do that. We really can usually only search patients if we can say we think that there's a risk here. So it's a bit more problematic, but the VA, without a doubt, and if anybody can get them to give you their plans, they're fantastic. They do a wonderful job of disarming and neutralizing patients, and their police force is also very good at de-escalation. And they're, hey, I'm your friend, they do that very well. But there are other, I just don't want people who don't work in a VA hospital to think that they can get officers on duty that carry firearms. It's not. The laws are very specific, community, state to state, and it's something that we need to think about. But the VA is a nice place to work, and their EMR is delightful.
One thing I want to add to that, kind of in this vein, is I've worked in a hospital where they, during my years there, they put metal detectors in the entrance to the emergency room. And there was a lot of discussion back and forth, and I've been seeing the same conversations having in my current facility, where there's a sense that it's gonna give the impression to the community that they're not welcome, or make people feel less safe. Like, why are there metal detectors? And I have to say, having worked in an institution that did this, and having been privy to the surveys for the staff and the patients and visitors in the year following implementing this for the ER, it had the opposite impact. It made people feel more safe coming in. It made them feel more reassured that the hospital was taking their safety seriously. And so that's just something that, over the next, I think, few years, we're going to see more and more places have this discussion. Should we put metal detectors in our entrances? And I can at least say from personal experience, and we'll see sort of how the data kind of agrees or disagrees with me, but from personal experience in a hospital where we did implement metal detectors outside the ER to enter it, it did not give the community a sense they weren't welcome. It does not make people feel unsafe. It actually had the opposite impact. They felt more safe. And so it's just another kind of conversation to sort of think about when we think about how are ways that we can secure our entrances.
Yeah, I mean, there are always naysayers for doing anything. I mean, it's just the same thing which happened with masks, and there are always people, and we know it's been ground to a pulp about assault rifles and what have you. So we are not going to go there, because that's a whole different topic altogether. What Dr. Manoj is asking is that, do you believe there is, there are some chronic or acute pain as a surrogate marker for violence, as happened recently? In other words, if there's a patient who has a chronic pain, or has even had some kind of depressive episode and stuff like that, and I think a psychiatrist also can answer that. Can these be red flagged? I think that's what he's asking.
Yes, however, the data doesn't show that those are the patients that have been, I think it's 280 active shooter events in 2022 so far. So I'm not exactly sure that number's in the 200s for sure. And we're not seeing that. Everybody says that is the issue, or they're fearful of that issue. It doesn't seem to be at this point what's going on right now. But certainly chronic pain patients who've had poor interactions with the healthcare system can be more violent. And they certainly, with the EMRs the way they are, they can and should have a red flag that this patient needs more help. They're suffering, and let's let them not suffer by suicide by police.
Well, and additionally, I think a big issue is that we're not collecting that data. And so I know that active shooter and is sort of the bigger thing that we're focusing on. But when you think back to sort of the scope of workplace violence that I talked about at the beginning, and understanding that the more of these incidents we capture before it becomes violent, then the better data our administration and our safety and environmental sort of people in our facilities can review and sort of see, okay, what are the types of workplace violence incidents that we're having? What are the types of units they're having? And again, a lot of it is just creating a really good mechanism in your facility to report this, to make staff know to file incident reports for things, even if it doesn't physically relate to violence, but that is sort of in that scope of workplace violence. And I think as we get more data, we can kind of start to see which types of patients are having more episodes of workplace violence. And then even when some bigger event happens, like an active shooter, if we have more data about those people and the activities that they've done in the past, then we can maybe start creating some sort of risk strategies and really sort of, algorithms or sort of things to look for as a facility. And every facility serves a different community. So, my facility, we serve a lot of sickle cell patients, right? And so maybe as we increase the incident reports of sort of nonviolent issues, then we might start to see patterns saying, okay, our sickle cell patients seem to have X, Y, and Z happening. And again, I'm just using that as an example where each community is very different, the patient population is different. And so a big part of that question, I think, is really encouraging people to report issues, think about that whole scope of workplace violence I talked about even before the active shooter part, and see if you can start doing pattern recognition in your community, see if you can see the vulnerable areas in your facility that need to start having a little bit more attention paid to it.
Awesome, great. So let's go to the next question. Dr. Veena Govila makes a comment. I think schools or places need a security check for guns or some kind of sensors for better security better security control. So it's kind of going into the chronic debate as the Republicans versus Democrats. So what do you think of that?
Well, if I had a choice of how I was going to spend my time and money, I would not spend it on arming schools. I would spend it on disarming people who are trying to kill children in schools through controlling assault weapons. And if you look, when the assault weapons ban expired, shortly after that was, I think it was in 2004. And since then, we have done nothing but logarithmically increase the number of wounds to people as a result of it. So that's, there's only so much energy that everybody has in their life, in their day. And I would rather spend my energy getting rid of those things than doing the school. But that's personal. That's my opinion based on how I feel. My children are all adults, but the thought of sending them to school and not knowing if they were going to be safe could make you crazy. That's really scary that I can't put my kid in school and go to work and know my child is safe. That is a terrible thing. And so that's what I think, you ask, it's an opinion question, and that's my opinion. If we were to just get rid of the bullets for automatic weapons, they would be if you couldn't sell them, you can't buy plutonium, why can you buy an assault bullet? Really, if you think about it, you can't make a nuclear bomb. Why can you use something that has the killing capacity of a small nuclear bomb? It's not okay. It's not how our society should be. And as I travel around, I get so embarrassed of being an American because our attitudes toward guns are ridiculous. And, responsible gun ownership, hey, knock yourself out, go shoot a deer, whatever. But this is not responsible gun ownership. And if you'll notice, the last couple of cases, these guys also went to the Army Navy surplus store and bought themselves tactical gears. So the guy in Buffalo, they couldn't even shoot. And probably why he'll stand trial and never get out of prison for the rest of his life. But that's the other issue. So to me, I would rather control it from that end than on the school's end. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's
So
very community dependent, sort of what your community will tolerate. And that's also why I bring up the metal detectors. It's just understanding, don't assume that your community will or won't tolerate something, but really look at how do we create an environment of safety in our campus, in our community, and what does that look like? Does that look like having metal detectors? Does that look like having more police force? Does that look like just sort of encouraging, again, identification badges, locking doors, that type of thing? But I think it's going to be very community dependent what that community tolerates. But again, don't make assumptions. Really do the research and see what your community needs.
You know, I've noticed a lot of things in the chat, and I'm sorry to interrupt the meet, that's saying, you know, can I get it in my community? Can I do this? Number one, everybody has an FBI office attached to their community. There are FBI liaisons who will go and give lectures, and some of them are fantastic. And they will go into go to your school, they'll go to grand rounds at your hospital, your facility. They really want to have people prepared. So that's the federal one. And we live in New York City. New York City Police Department has about 15 people, and all they do is go out and train anybody who asks, whenever they ask, in active shooter. It can be for your Elks Club, it can be for anything you want, and they will go and do that. So those things do exist within your communities. Every large city, even probably every small city, has a community outreach team within law enforcement to talk about run, hide, fight. So that exists. That's easy to get. Just call the local FBI precinct and do that. We certainly are very willing to do it, but it's a shame that more people don't know that this resource is there and your tax dollars are paying for it, because they are, and it is there pretty much everywhere in the United States at this point. I can't think of, maybe somewhere in Alaska, but I can't think of any place else that doesn't have it very quickly. You have to make an appointment, but that's one of the things that really does exist.
great, thank you. Just now rounding up, we've got a few questions left, and then I'll pitch it to Dr. Sagar. He's back. So let me finish this question. That answers a lot of questions, including Dr. Mohindra's questions, whether this is available to their 400 physicians. Rupen Joshi says that more research on gun violence, etc., should be done, which all of us agree, but it's just become so political that it's becoming. I'm surprised that they have not called you to the Capitol to talk on this, Dr. Arkula.
Well, I don't know if I said it, but if I did, stop me. But the Bush administration prevented the CDC from collecting data on gunshot wounds. And so that was for 8 years. The Obama administration reversed the law. It went through Congress, but they reversed the law kind of late. And the Trump administration then put through an executive order, so the CDC still couldn't collect the data that we're looking for. And then, of course, there was that little thing called a pandemic that got people kind of balled up in their issues. But there is lots of data coming out. It's very good data, and I'm sure that a lot more people are going to be publishing interesting things about it. But thank you very much. And
I'll quickly go through the other questions. Basically, some of the questions are directed at antidepressant causing it. That's not the topic of today's discussion. It's about active shooter, and a lot of other questions have been answered by Dr. Boni, saying that how you can get FBI to give talks, and they are also available.
And we're very available, both of us. You have our emails.
Exactly. So Dr. Narendra Pai said the founding fathers did not have to deal with social media and drugs when they did the Second Amendment. Good point. Nip in the bud. Nip it in the bud, don't sell it to bad customers. The debate going on, that will go on forever. Who are the bad customers, whether we are taking their rights away, NRA, Republicans, Democrats. Let's not go there. Let's talk about some real kind of science, and we really love to hear what you have to say, but you will have the last comment. But let me get Sagar, Dr. Galwankar. You guys all know him. He's my CME co-chair, and absolutely has been instrumental in getting me unique topics and stellar speakers. I cannot thank him enough. I mean, he's by himself a great shot. I mean, in the ER emergency medicine field in India and here is he's in Florida State University emergency residency program director, and he graduated from Pune. He is trained in University of South Florida. He has done double masters in public health and business management, and he's a fellow of Royal College of Physicians, American College of International Medicine, American Academy of Emergency Medicine, American College of Emergency Experts of India, and so on and so forth. He's absolutely very well educated, well trained, and has got a lot of laurels. He's won the prestigious Qazi International Leadership Award and the AAPI Most Distinguished Award twice as a resident and as a young fellow. So he's a very well learned, and I'm so glad that I had him in my team to bring such great CME lectures. Again, answering a few more questions for them. All the lectures are available on the AAPI website. And if you want to not go there and want an easy thing out, just email me at amitcmd@yahoo.com, and I will send you links to all the talks from last year. We have got amazing talks on hospice, preventive medicine, drug errors. I mean, you name it. We have got excellent talks, and we'd love to share it. Having said that, over to Sagar. Can we have you come on and maybe turn your video on?
So, thank you very much, everybody, for a fantastic presentation. So we had a lot of lessons learned after 26/11, what happened in Bombay, where there were active shooters across, and IndusCM worked a lot across the country to build these programs. That was a very big shock as they entered various centers and killed people, including hospitals and hotels. A very good show, which you can watch. I'm not proctoring for that, but Mumbai Diaries shows you how the health system interacted with everybody. So what I really think is these presentations are very important. I'm very thankful to AAPI. I think we brought together a lot of work. CDC does a lot of work. Active shooter program is a big thing across the country, and I think all hospitals should engage. IndusCM and WASM engages that very actively. Bonnie and Pia are one of our leaders who engage in that. And I think that's a great opportunity to bring it all together. So I'm very thankful to Bonnie and Pia. We have been working with each other for more than a decade now as we developed emergency medicine, emergency systems, emergency security, and vigilance across India and Southeast Asia and across the world. So I think this is just a picture preview of what we have achieved. And I would like AAPI to see how quality is delivered. And what me and Amit tried this year was to deliver quality. And if people are really engaged and committed, quality itself wins. So quality is visible. And that's very important. And that's what we did through CME, because I wanted to really take an attempt to change AAPI's face from a cultural to a more competent organization committed towards medical quality. So I think work shows, and I think I've set a benchmark this year, which will be very difficult to defeat. And I challenge my next predecessors who come after me to challenge this and do better than me. So thank you very much, everybody. And that's all I will say. This was my last CME for this year. And I did this only at the request of Dr. Kotimukula and Dr. Amit. And I am open to the challenge to the next team to prove me wrong. So thank you very much. And that was a great year. Thank you.
Thank you, Sagar.
Sagar, really, before I pitch it back to you, Bonnie and Apia, Sagar, you have been a great, you're an academician, and you actually have guided me to the CME. My aim was to make this year's topics out of the box, not medically, which will be enjoyed by every specialty, not being specialty specific. We did that, and Sagar has helped me with four very important, amazing topics. So for the final closing comments before I pitch it to Anupama, and I want to have Bonnie and Pia say a few lines before we end.
Well, I have to tell you that if Sagar calls and asks me to do something, I never say no. And I know that whenever that happens, it's going to be an excited, interesting group of people who really are interested in saving lives and making care better and helping our patients have the lifespan that they deserve. And I'm honored to get to spend this time with you. And I want to thank you for your incredible activity. And I hope someday soon we'll all get to meet each other in person rather than only in 2 degrees with Zoom. Thank you.
And before I give it to Anupama, Pia, your thoughts?
Yeah, again, thank you guys so much for having us. I said, Bonnie was sort of taught me everything I know, but Sagar has also been a mentor for me for my entire career. So a lot of the sort of fancy things on my CV, I owe him full credit to. Going forward, as I said, we're still kind of developing workplace violence committee and protocols in our facility. It is a new Joint Commission requirement. So please email me with any questions about how we're organizing it, which departments are involved, how we organize our staff training, and then also please give me feedback on things that have worked well in your facility, things that haven't, because again, we're sort of creating this together. So I really hope that this community continues to share information about this, thoughts on this, what works, what doesn't work. And then, yeah, Dr. Quill and I are always happy to speak if you want us to come and talk to your physicians, or if you want to just, again, share ideas and share lecture slides.
And then
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, one last thing that Sagar just sent me a text on and asked me to please remember is that out of INDA-CM and WASM grew the American College of Academic International Medicine, which is about the academics of medicine. We have members from all over the world, a lot from Africa and Southeast Asia and areas like that. AAPI is having their annual meeting, and it's a very good place if you want some help in mentoring and getting some papers written on various activities. I really recommend American College Academic International Medicine. Sagar can hook you up with them as well. So sorry, I just got that text.
No, thank you so much. Thank you very much. And before I give it to Anupama, for the last time as a CME this year, this is my last CME, stepping down as a CME chair. Hope I have done justice to my post. Thank you, Anupama, for trusting me with this post. I would like to also, in addition to Sagar, thank Dr. Vemuri Murthy, because he's the guy who from Chicago Medical Society has given us CME, category 1 CME, AMA, category 1 AMS CMEs throughout the year, with a fraction of the cost what AAPI would have spent elsewhere. And last but not the least, I want to thank Vijaya Kodali, who is our person behind she's our, the Wizard of Oz sitting behind the green curtain. She's one of those. She sits there, makes magic happen. She actually, we frustrate her sometimes by not meeting the deadlines of all the COIs and stuff like that. But and she answers to hundreds of emails, but she has come through. And she's like, she always comes through, sometimes late, but she always comes through. Thank you, Vijaya, for being the person behind the scenes and handling all this. So, so great, Anupama, over to you.
Thank you, Amit.
As a CME chair.
Thank you, everyone. And it was a great year. And I wish Dr. Anupama a great conference. This is a career high for her to lead the representation of India in the United States. And she will be signing off in a few weeks at her annual convention in San Antonio. So it's been a great journey. It was my honor to help Amit design these beautiful CMEs. And I think we did well to bring out of the box thinking to engage everybody. People will watch these recordings. And I think when we talk about active shooter, that's a very sensitive political issue, but that is also a life issue. We all came here to work hard and to remain alive, and everybody wants to live a life. And when that security to life is threatened, then that's a very important aspect which has to be done. So as doctors, I would encourage all your connections and all you to go back and become advocates for an active shooter preparedness program at your institution, because it's not one size fit all, and if you want help and technical expertise, we could provide. There are many other resources who could help you, but having an active shooter program is very, very important because it deals with the 4 pillars of the entries, the exit of the hospital, the known and the unknown people who are in the hospital when this crisis strikes, and the preparedness and security systems you have placed in the hospital. You cannot forget the role of media when they surround the hospital, the role of the loved ones who want to know more about their victims, the role of the other rescuers who come, and the role of security personnel who show up. And in that lies your preparedness. So there is a lot of things which go into it again and again. It is just like guarding the congressmen or presidents, how they do drills again and again and again. And there has to be a plan for a plan. And in a country where human life is most important, that was one of my driving forces when I developed emergency medicine in India, is how do we value life in the United States is clearly seen in the emergency department. That's the only specialty which demonstrates value for life every minute, 24 hours of the day, a specialty which never sleeps. And we are the availabilist, and we demonstrate that value for life. And that was what drove me to the US. And that's what I carried back to the whole world, is the value for life. If a health system cannot serve its citizens when they need them the most, then there is no health system. And that's what drove me. And I think when that health system is threatened by a crisis, and that becomes a norm, then we need to prepare against it, like we prepare for everything else. So if you fail to prepare, you have surely prepared to fail. And that's very, very important. So I would encourage you all to go back and start active shooter crisis practice programs and drills and plans at your hospital. That would be the only thing which would come out, which is our advocacy message from this closing CME. And how serendipity strikes is that we never imagined that we would be speaking in such an apt situation today. We just did that. We wanted to end it on a great note, so we organized this CME, but see how things turned out around us, that this brought us to a stage to believe that. So I would also like you all to pray for all the victims of these shootings everywhere. And that's very important, because a sense of solidarity is important. Compassion is important as doctors. So take a few minutes after this session to pray for them, or whenever you pray for the peace of mind of these people who, for no rhyme or reason, lost their lives. With this, thank you, Dr. Gotimukola, and I hope you have a great convention. And Amit, it had been a great honor to work with you and know you for all these 2 decades. Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you, Pia, for coming in and doing this for me and for AAPI. And we will continue to do our good work in Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you, Sagar. Thank you so much. And thank you, Amit. Vijay, are you there? Can you open the plugs? So I just want to thank each of you, Dr. Arkula and Dr. Pia Daniel. Amazing talks. I just want to request both of you, if you have anything, any notes or anything you can share with, I can share happily with our membership, because a lot of our physicians are solo practitioners and private practice, small clinics, small offices, office-based practices. They do not have this education. So I know a lot of people could not attend the session today, but I wish they could. But is there any way I can get some kind of a synopsis of your talks so that I can share with the general membership? And so let me just give a little token of our gratitude to Dr. Pia Daniel. We recognize your outstanding contributions in the field of emergency medicine, and we welcome you as member of AAPI Distinguished Speakers Club. And next one, Vijaya. And thank you, Dr. Bonnie Arkula, for your outstanding contributions in the field of emergency medicine. And we welcome you as member of our AAPI Distinguished Speakers Club. And thank you so much for your time, and hope you can join us at the convention, maybe we can have a small roundtable discussion to see if we can change any rules and laws and how to prevent this great preventable health hazard right now, which is escalating. So thank you all so much for the time. And I thank all our members who have joined today for the CME, and we look forward for your participation more and more in attending these CME talks. And we will adjourn now. Thank you all.